Captain Jake Morrison stepped off his ship onto the massive space station floating above the planet Centaura. The metal halls stretched out before him like a city in the stars. Hundreds of beings from different worlds walked past him, all dressed in their finest clothes. Today was the day of the Alliance marriage ceremony, and Jake felt nervous about what he had to do. The ceremony happened every year. Each world in the Alliance sent someone to choose a partner from the available candidates. These marriages kept peace between different species across the galaxy. Jake represented Earth and humanity. He had never wanted this job, but his superiors thought he would be good at it. He followed the crowd toward the main hall, where all the candidates waited. The hall was enormous, with a glass ceiling that showed the stars outside. Beings from dozens of worlds stood in groups, talking and laughing. The Valorians stood tall and proud with their golden skin shining under the lights. The Nexari moved like living computers, calculating everything they saw. The Chronari warriors flexed their muscles and showed off their battle scars. Jake looked around for the Centauri candidates. He spotted them near the far wall. 3 young Centauri women stood together in beautiful purple robes. Their blue skins sparkled with jewels, and their forearms moved gracefully as they spoke with potential. Suitors. But Jake noticed a 4th figure standing alone in the shadows. Princess Lyra of Centaura stood apart from everyone else. She wore a simple white dress instead of the fancy purple robes her sisters wore. Her long black hair fell over her shoulders, and she held a white walking stick in her hands. Jake could see that her eyes looked different from the others. They were cloudy and unfocused. The princess was blind. No one approached her. Suitors walked past her as if she was not there. Jake watched a tall Valorian male look at her with disgust. Before turning away, a group of Nixari examined her from a distance, then shook their heads and moved on. Even the Chronari warriors, who claimed to value strength above all else, ignored her completely. Jake felt angry watching this happen. On Earth, people had learned long ago that being different did not make someone worthless. His own sister was deaf, but she was one of the smartest people he knew. She had become a famous scientist who helped design the ships that brought humanity to the stars. He walked toward Princess Lyra. As he got closer, she turned her head slightly in his direction. Her hearing must be very good, Jake thought. When? He was still 10 feet away. She spoke. You walk differently than the others, she said. Her voice was soft but clear. You are human. Yes, I am, Jake replied. I am Captain Jake Morrison. May I speak with you, Princess? A look of surprise crossed her face. You know who I am? Of course. You are Princess Lyra, daughter of Emperor Valen of Centaura. She laughed, but there was sadness in it. Most people here would rather forget that fact. Jake stepped closer. Why do you stand alone? Your sisters have many suitors speaking with them. Look at me, Lyra said, gesturing to her eyes. I am blind. Who would want a wife who cannot see? My people believe I'm cursed. They think my blindness makes me weak and useless. Your people are wrong, Jake said firmly. Lyra tilted her head. You say that, but you do not know me. You do not know what I can or cannot do. Then tell me, Jake said. He sat down on a nearby bench and patted the space next to him. I have time to listen. For a moment, Lyra looked confused. No one had ever asked her to talk about herself. She slowly sat down beside him, keeping her walking stick close. I lost my sight when I was very young, she began. A fever that almost killed me, but strange things happened after I recovered. I could hear conversations happening on the other side of the palace. I could tell when someone was lying just by listening to their voice. Sometimes I could sense what people were thinking or feeling. That sounds like telepathy, Jake said. Yes, but my people fear it. They think it is connected to my blindness, like both are punishments from the gods. My father loves me, but he does not know what to do with a daughter who can read minds." Jake listened as she told him about her life. She had been kept hidden in the palace for most of her childhood. Teachers were afraid to work with her. Servants whispered that she was dangerous. Her own sisters treated her kindly, but kept their distance. "I have spent years learning to live without sight," Lyra continued. "I can move through the palace without help. I can identify people by their footsteps or the way they breathe. I know when storms are coming before the weather reports. But none of that matters to anyone here." "It matters to me," Jake said. Lyra turned toward him. "Why? You barely know me." "Because on my world, we have learned something important. Being different is not the same as being broken. Some of our greatest achievements came from people others thought were disabled or strange." Across the hall, Jake could see other diplomats, watching them. A group of Valorians were talking and pointing in their direction. He could hear them laughing. The Nexari were probably calculating the political cost of his choice. The Cornari looked disgusted that he would waste time on someone they saw as weak. "They are talking about us," Lyra said quietly. "Can you hear them from here? I can sense their emotions. They think you are making a foolish choice. They believe I will bring shame to both our peoples." Jake stood up and offered his hand to Lyra. "Princess, would you do me the honor of accepting my proposal of marriage?" Lyra was silent for a long moment. Her cloudy eyes seemed to look right through him. "You are serious?" "I am." She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm and steady. "Yes, Captain Morrison, I accept." The hall fell silent as word spread quickly through the crowd. Jake could feel hundreds of eyes watching them. He helped Lyra to her feet and walked with her toward the registration area where their choice would be made official. Emperor Valen appeared beside them before they reached the desk. The tall Zentari ruler looked shocked and worried at the same time. "Captain Morrison," the Emperor said, "are you certain about this choice? My daughter is ... special. Her abilities are not always stable. She can be dangerous when upset." "Your Majesty," Jake replied, "I believe your daughter is exactly what humanity needs as a partner. We do not fear her abilities. We respect them." The Emperor looked at his daughter with sad eyes. "Lyra, are you sure this is what you want?" "Father, for the first time in my life, someone sees value in who I am instead of disappointment in what I am not." "Yes, I am sure." As they completed the paperwork, Jake could hear angry voices behind them. The other species were not happy with his choice. He heard words like weakness and poor judgment and disaster for the Alliance. Jake did not care what they thought. He had spent his whole life learning that real strength came from accepting and celebrating differences, not hiding from them. As he signed his name on the marriage contract, he looked at Lyra and smiled. She could not see his smile, but she squeezed his hand anyway. Somehow, she knew exactly what he was feeling. The weeks following their engagement passed quickly for Jake and Lyra. They spent their days together on the space station, learning about each other before the formal wedding ceremony. Jake discovered that Lyra was far more capable than anyone had imagined. She moved through the station halls with grace and confidence. Her walking stick tapped against the floor in a steady rhythm, but Jake noticed she barely needed it. She seemed to know exactly where everything was. When they walked together, she would warn him about obstacles before he saw them. "There is a maintenance panel open on your left," she would say, or "someone dropped water near the food court. The floor is slippery." Jake was amazed by her abilities. "How do you know these things?" "I listen to everything," Lyra explained as they sat in the station garden. "I can hear the hum of electronics, the drip of water, the way air moves around objects. My other senses became stronger when I lost my sight. She demonstrated by closing her eyes and describing everyone in the garden around them. The Valorian couple by the fountain are arguing about money. I can hear the stress in their voices. The Nexari family near the trees are discussing travel plans to their home world. The human woman reading on the bench is sad because she misses someone. Jake looked around and saw that she was right about everything. This is incredible. Your people call this a curse? They fear what they do not understand, Lyra said. My telepathic abilities are even stronger, but they scare people more. I can sense emotions, sometimes thoughts. When I was younger, I could not control it. I would know things I was not supposed to know. Jake thought about his sister and the technology that helped her communicate despite being deaf. On Earth, we create tools to help people with different abilities. We do not try to fix them. We try to make the world work better for them. He showed Lyra some of the devices he had brought from Earth. There was a small scanner that could describe objects and read text out loud. A navigation system that used sound to help with directions. Communication devices that could translate thoughts into speech. These are wonderful, Lyra said as she tested the devices. But I have learned to do many of these things with my own abilities. I know, Jake said. These are not to replace what you can do. They are to make things easier when you want them. Together, they began modifying the devices to work with Lyra's natural abilities instead of replacing them. Jake was fascinated by how her mind worked. She could process information in ways that sighted people could not imagine. While they worked together, troubling news came from across the Alliance. Several diplomatic missions had failed mysteriously. Trade routes were becoming dangerous as ships disappeared without warning. The Vardani Empire, which had been quiet for years, was making aggressive moves toward Alliance space. Jake attended briefing meetings with other Alliance representatives. The Valorian Admiral Craig spoke about increased military patrols. The Nexari coordinator Lisa presented data showing the attacks followed patterns that seemed impossible to predict. The Chronari General Pete demanded immediate military response, but Jake noticed something strange during these meetings. Lyra had asked to attend as his cultural advisor, and she sat quietly in the corner listening to everything. After each meeting, she seemed troubled. Something is wrong, she told Jake after a particularly tense briefing about Vardani movements. What do you mean? The emotions in that room did not match the words being spoken. Admiral Craig was afraid, but not of the Vardani. Lisa was calculating something, but not military strategies. General Pete was angry, but at someone in the room, not at our enemies. Jake frowned. Are you saying they are lying? I am saying their thoughts and feelings do not match what they are telling us. Someone in those meetings is not who they appear to be. Jake wanted to believe her, but he knew how it would sound to the other Alliance members. They already questioned his judgment for choosing a blind wife. If he started making accusations based on her telepathic feelings, they would think he had lost his mind completely. The situation got worse when the Vardani attacked a mining colony on the edge of Alliance space. The attack was perfectly timed. To avoid the patrol ships, the enemy knew exactly when and where to strike. It was as if they had inside information about Alliance defenses. After the attack, emergency meetings were called. Jake watched Lyra carefully during these sessions. Her face grew more concerned with each meeting. When they returned to their quarters, she was visibly upset. Jake, I am certain now. Someone in those meetings is working with the Vardani. I can sense deception, but I cannot identify exactly who it is. The mental signatures are somehow masked. Could you be wrong? Jake asked gently. Lyra was quiet for a moment. I have been wrong before. My abilities are not perfect. But Jake, I have never been this certain about deception and been mistaken. Someone is betraying the Alliance. Jake struggled with what to do. He trusted Lyra completely, but he had no proof that others would accept. Her telepathic abilities were seen as unreliable by most Alliance species. If he made accusations without evidence, it could destroy his credibility and hurt the fragile trust between humans and other species. Meanwhile, other Alliance members began expressing concerns about Jake's choice of wife. Commander Helen from the Valorian fleet spoke to him privately after one meeting. "Captain Morrison," she said, "many of us are worried about your judgment. Choosing a disabled spouse suggests you make emotional decisions instead of logical ones. In times of war, we need leaders who think clearly." Jake felt his anger rising. "Commander, my wife's abilities have already proven valuable to our discussions. She notices things others miss. She notices things that may not be there," Helen replied. "Paranoid thoughts from someone with mental instabilities are not helpful intelligence." Similar conversations happened with other Alliance representatives. The Nexari questioned whether humans could be trusted with important decisions. The Chronari suggested that Jake's weakness made him unsuitable for military planning. Even some humans in the Alliance began to doubt whether Jake was the right person to represent. Jake found himself defending not just his marriage choice, but humanity's entire approach to diversity and inclusion. In meeting after meeting, he had to explain why differences in ability could be strengths rather than weaknesses. "My species has learned that innovation comes from different perspectives," he told the Alliance Council. "The greatest breakthroughs in human history came from people who thought differently than everyone else." But his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The other species were focused on traditional measures of strength and ability. They could not understand how blindness could be anything other than a disadvantage. The pressure was taking a toll on both Jake and Lyra. She began to doubt her own abilities as people questioned her mental state. Her telepathic powers became harder to control when she was stressed, which only made others more suspicious of her. "Maybe they are right," she said one evening as they walked through the station gardens. "Maybe I am imagining things that are not there. Lyra, I have seen what you can do. I have watched you identify problems and solutions that no one else could see. Do not let their fear make you doubt yourself. But what if I am wrong about the spy? What if my feelings are just paranoia caused by stress?" Jake stopped walking and turned to face her. "Then we will deal with that when it happens." "But I would rather trust your instincts and be wrong than ignore them and miss a real threat." That night, news came of another Vardani attack. This time they had struck a supply depot that was supposed to be secret. The location had been shared only with high-ranking Alliance officials in a classified briefing just days before dot. As Jake read the report, he felt a chill run down his spine. Lyra was right. There was definitely a spy among them. The question was how to prove it before more people died. The Alliance Council gathered for an emergency session after the attack on the supply depot. Jake sat with the other representatives in the circular chamber, while Lyra took her usual place in the observer section. The mood was tense as Admiral Craig presented the damage reports. 15 ships destroyed, 40 crew members dead, the Valorian officer announced. "The Vardani knew exactly where to hit us. They bypassed our outer defenses and struck the most vulnerable storage areas." General Pete slammed his fist on the table. This was an inside job. Someone gave them our classified information. The Nexari coordinator Lisa pulled up holographic displays showing attack patterns. "My analysis confirms that the enemy had detailed knowledge of our security protocols. The probability of such accurate strikes without insider information is less than 2%. Jake watched Lyra carefully during the meeting. She sat perfectly still, but he could see tension in her shoulders. Her head tilted slightly as she listened to each speaker. Her face showed increasing concern as the discussion continued. Ambassador Ray from the Valdorian delegation spoke up. We must increase security clearances and limit access to sensitive information. Too many people know our plans. Agreed, said Commander Helen. We should also consider that some of our recent additions to the Alliance may not be as trustworthy as we hoped. Jake knew that comment was directed at humanity, and specifically at him. The other species still questioned whether humans could be trusted with important decisions, especially after his choice to marry Lyra Dot. As the meeting continued, Jake noticed Lyra becoming more agitated. She gripped the arms of her chair tightly, and her breathing became shallow. Something was definitely wrong. When the session ended, Jake quickly went to her side. What is it? What did you sense? We need to leave this room immediately, Lyra whispered urgently. Do not make it obvious, but get us out of here now. Jake trusted her instincts completely. He helped her stand and guided her toward the exit, making casual conversation as if nothing was wrong. Once they were safely in the hallway, Lyra pulled him into an empty conference room. Jake, I know who the spy is, she said, her voice shaking with excitement and fear. Who? Ambassador Ray from the Valdorian delegation. But Jake, he is not really Valdorian. His thoughts feel completely different from what they should be. His emotional patterns are wrong. His heartbeat and breathing are not quite right either. Jake stared at her. Are you saying he is not who he claims to be? I am saying he is not what he claims to be. I think he is a shapeshifter, a Vardani infiltrator who has been pretending to be Ambassador Ray for months, maybe longer. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. If Lyra was right, the Vardani had been sitting in on alliance meetings, learning their plans and feeding information back to their military for who knows how long. Every strategy session, every classified briefing, every secret operation had been compromised. We have to tell the Council, Jake said. Will they believe us? Lyra asked. They already think I am paranoid and unreliable. They will want proof. Jake knew she was right. The Alliance leaders barely tolerated Lyra's presence at meetings. They would never accept accusations based solely on her telepathic impressions, especially against a respected ambassador who had been with the Alliance for over a year. Then we need to get proof, Jake said. What can you tell me about his real identity? Lyra concentrated, trying to recall the mental signatures she had detected. His thoughts have the aggressive patterns typical of Vardani military officers. But more than that, he thinks in Vardani battle language, not Valdorian diplomatic terms. His emotional responses are all wrong for someone who grew up in Valdorian culture. Can you detect other shapeshifters? Are there more of them? I am not sure. The mental masking they use is very sophisticated. I only noticed Ray because I have been listening to him for weeks. The inconsistencies built up over time until I could not ignore them anymore. Jake began pacing the small room. We need a plan. If we accuse him directly without proof, he will just deny everything. Worse, he might disappear, and they will replace him with someone else. What if we could make him reveal himself? Lyra suggested. Shapeshifters have limits. They cannot maintain perfect disguises under extreme stress. Jake thought about this. The Valdorian physiology is different from Vardani biology. If we could create a situation where his body reacts instinctively, he might not be able to control the shape-shifting. They spent the next hour developing a plan. It was risky and would require perfect timing, but it might be their only chance to expose the infiltrator before more Alliance forces were destroyed. The next morning, Jake requested a special briefing with the Security Committee. He claimed to have new intelligence about Vardani attack patterns that required immediate attention. Ambassador Ray attended, as Jake knew he would. During the meeting, Jake presented false information about a planned Alliance counterattack. He made it seem like a real operation, complete with ship movements, timing, and target locations. The fake plans were designed to be too tempting for a Vardani spy to ignore. As Jake spoke, Lyra sat in her usual corner, monitoring Ray's reactions. She could sense his excitement as he absorbed the false intelligence. His mental patterns showed. He was already planning how to transmit this information to his real masters. But Jake had built a trap into his presentation. Hidden in the fake battle plans was information that only a Vardani military officer would recognize as significant. A reference to a classified Vardani weapon system that the Alliance was not supposed to know about. When Jake mentioned the weapon, Ray reacted instinctively. For just a moment, his diplomatic mask slipped. His body language shifted from Valdorian formal posture to Vardani military attention. His breathing pattern changed. Most importantly for Lyra, his mental shields flickered, revealing the aggressive militaristic thoughts underneath. "Ambassador Ray," Jake said suddenly, "you seem very interested in our intelligence about Vardani weapon systems. Do you have experience with their military technology?" Ray quickly recovered his composure. "Of course not, Captain Morrison. I am simply concerned about the threat these weapons pose to Alliance forces." But Lyra had sensed the moment of revelation. She stood up slowly, her white walking stick in her hand. "You are not Ambassador Ray," she said clearly. "You are a Vardani shapeshifter who has been feeding information to your military for months." The room fell silent. Every Alliance representative stared at Lyra in shock. Ray's face showed perfect diplomatic confusion. "Princess, I understand you have been under stress lately," Ray said smoothly. "But these accusations are quite serious. Perhaps you should rest." "Prove you are Valdorian," Jake demanded. "Submit to a detailed medical scan." "This is outrageous," Ray protested. "I will not be subjected to invasive procedures based on the paranoid delusions of an unstable individual." But his refusal only made him look more suspicious. General Pete ordered security forces to surround Ray. While medical technicians prepared scanning equipment, the medical scan revealed what Lyra had sensed. Ray's cellular structure was completely different from Valdorian biology. His DNA showed clear markers of Vardani origin. Most damning of all, they found cybernetic implants designed for long-range communication with Vardani ships. When confronted with the evidence, the shapeshifter abandoned his disguise. His body flowed and changed, revealing his true Vardani form. He was taller and more muscular than Ambassador Ray, with the distinctive ridged skin and predatory features of a Vardani warrior. "You may have caught me," the Vardani agent snarled. "But it is too late. My people know everything about your defenses. Your alliance will fall." Security forces took the spy into custody, but Jake knew the damage was already done. How many months of intelligence had been compromised? How many Alliance operations had been betrayed? Worse, if there was one shapeshifter, there were probably others. The Alliance security systems had completely failed to detect the infiltration. Their entire approach to identifying threats was based on visual recognition and standard biometric scans, neither of which worked against advanced SHEPESHI FTERS. As the emergency session continued, Jake realized something important. Lyra's abilities were not just useful for detecting this one spy. She might be the only person in the Alliance who could identify other infiltrators. The Alliance leaders finally understood what Jake had been trying to tell them. What they had seen as this ability was actually a unique capability that no one else possessed. Lyra's blindness had forced her to develop other senses so acutely that she could detect deceptions that fooled everyone else. "Princess Lyra," Admiral Craig said formally, "the Alliance owes you an apology and our gratitude. Your warning may have saved countless lives." But even as they praised her, Jake could see the calculating looks in their eyes. They no longer saw Lyra as disabled or useless. Now they saw her as a weapon to be used against their enemies. Jake worried that they would want to exploit her abilities without considering the cost to her well-being. The war with the Vardani Empire was about to begin in earnest, and Lyra would be at the center of it, whether she wanted to be or not. The capture of the Vardani shapeshifter changed everything for the Alliance. Within hours of the revelation, security protocols were completely revised. Every ambassador, military officer, and government official had to undergo detailed medical scans. The results were terrifying. 3 more shapeshifters were discovered in key positions throughout the Alliance. A Chronari general who had been feeding military plans to the enemy. A Nexari trade coordinator who had been revealing supply routes. A human diplomat who had been compromising peace negotiations. The infiltration was deeper and more extensive than anyone had imagined. Jake sat in the Alliance command center watching the chaos unfold. Ships were being recalled from missions that might be compromised. Trade routes were shut down until they could be secured. Diplomatic meetings were postponed indefinitely. The entire Alliance was paralyzed by the discovery that they could not trust their own people. How many more are there? Admiral Craig asked during an emergency briefing. How do we know who we can trust? We scan everyone, General Pete replied, multiple times if necessary. That will take months, Lisa from the Nexari delegation pointed out. Meanwhile, the Vardani could launch a full-scale invasion while we are searching for spies. Jake looked across the room at Lyra, who was listening intently to the discussion. Since exposing the first shapeshifter, she had become the most important person in the Alliance. Every major decision now waited for her input about whether the people making it could be trusted. The pressure was enormous. Alliance leaders brought her dozens of suspects every day. She had to scan their thoughts and emotions, looking for signs of deception or alien mental patterns. The work was exhausting and often painful. Telepathic contact with hostile minds left her drained and sometimes physically sick. There has to be a better way, Jake said during the briefing. We cannot rely on Princess Lyra to personally examine every person in the Alliance. It is not fair to her, and it is not strategically sound to depend on one individual. Do you have a better suggestion? Admiral Craig asked. Jake had been thinking about this problem for days. What if we stopped trying to find all the spies and instead used them against the Vardani? The room fell quiet. Everyone stared at him. Explain, General Pete demanded. The shapeshifters we captured think they are still undetected. What if we let some of them continue their activities, but feed them false information instead of real intelligence? We could use Princess Lyra's abilities to identify them without arresting them immediately. Lisa began calculating probabilities on her computer. It could work. If we control what information the spies receive, we can mislead the Vardani military about our actual plans. It is dangerous, Admiral Craig warned. If even one real piece of intelligence gets through, it could cost lives. Everything we do now is dangerous, Jake replied. The question is whether we want to play defense forever or start fighting back. Lyra spoke up from her corner. I can help with this plan. My abilities work best when I am not trying to force them. If I spend time around suspected individuals in natural settings, I can learn their true mental patterns without them knowing they are being tested. The Alliance approved Jake's plan, but with strict conditions. Lyra would work with a team of specialists to identify shapeshifters gradually. They would create fake intelligence operations to feed false information to confirmed spies. Most importantly, they would prepare counterattacks based on where they expected the Vardani to strike. The first test came within a week. Alliance intelligence created a fake plan to attack a Vardani supply base near the border. They made sure the information reached 3 suspected shapeshifters through different channels. Then they waited to see whether Vardani would reinforce their defenses. The enemy response was exactly what Jake had predicted. Vardani ships moved to protect the fake target, leaving their real supply bases vulnerable. Alliance forces struck the actual targets while the enemy was defending empty space. It worked perfectly, Admiral Craig reported after the successful raids. We destroyed 2 major supply depots and captured a communications relay station. But the success came with a price. The mental strain on Lyra was becoming severe. Reading the thoughts of multiple shapeshifters every day was like forcing herself to listen to poison. The alien mental patterns were harsh and aggressive, completely different from the Alliance species she was used to. Jake found her in their quarters one evening, curled up on the bed with her hands pressed against her temples. "The headaches are getting worse," she admitted when he sat beside her. "Maybe you should take a break from the telepathic work." "I cannot. Too many people are depending on me. If I stop now, the Alliance could lose the advantage we have gained." Jake gently took her hands away from her head. "Lyra, you are not responsible for winning this war by yourself. Other people can learn to help, but they cannot do what I do. No one else can sense shapeshifters the way I can." Jake had been thinking about this problem too. What if we could teach others to recognize the signs you detect? Not through telepathy, but through observation and analysis? Over the next few days, Jake worked with Alliance scientists to study how Lyra identified shapeshifters. They recorded everything she noticed: changes in breathing patterns, subtle differences in body language, inconsistencies in emotional reactions. Slowly, they began to develop detection methods that other people could use. The breakthrough came when they realized that shapeshifters had to concentrate to maintain their disguises. Under stress, small mistakes became visible to trained observers. A Voldorian impersonator might use a Vardani hand gesture. A human shapeshifter might react to danger with alien reflexes. "We can create training programs," Lisa announced during a briefing. "Teach security personnel what to look for. It will not be as accurate as Princess Lyra's abilities, but it will reduce our dependence on telepathic scanning." The training programs were implemented across the Alliance. Within weeks, security teams were catching shapeshifters without Lyra's direct involvement. The success rate was lower than her telepathic detection, but it was better than nothing. Meanwhile, the false intelligence campaign was working beyond their expectations. Vardani forces kept responding to fake threats, while Alliance ships struck real targets. Enemy supply lines were being disrupted. Communication networks were under constant attack. For the first time since the war began, the Alliance was winning. But the Vardani Empire was not stupid. Their leaders began to suspect that their intelligence network was compromised. Jake noticed that enemy responses to planted information were becoming less predictable. "They are starting to question the intelligence they receive from their spies," Lyra observed during a strategy meeting. "I can sense confusion and suspicion in the shapeshifters' thoughts." "How long before they figure out what we are doing?" Admiral Craig asked. "Not long," Jake replied. "We need to be ready for them to change tactics." The change came sooner than expected. Instead of relying on their spy network, the Vardani Empire launched a massive direct assault on the Alliance capital system. It was a desperate gambit designed to end the war quickly through overwhelming force. Hundreds of Vardani warships dropped out of hyperspace around the capital world. They brought with them a new weapon that Alliance forces had never seen before, a device that created powerful telepathic interference across entire star systems. The weapon turned the Alliance's own strengths against them. Species that depended on telepathic communication found themselves blind and confused. Coordinators could not contact their fleets. Commanders could not communicate with their troops. The careful coordination that made Alliance forces effective collapsed completely, but Lyra was different. While other telepaths were overwhelmed by the interference, her abilities actually became stronger. Her brain, adapted to function without normal sensory input, processed the telepathic chaos differently than others. The static that blinded her allies clarified her perceptions by eliminating competing mental noise. "Jake," she said as alarms blared throughout the command center, "I can see everything. The telepathic weapon is not affecting me the way it affects others. I can sense the Vardani fleet positions, their movement patterns, even their tactical plans." Jake realized they had been given an unexpected advantage. While the Alliance fleet was struggling to coordinate in the telepathic storm, Lyra could provide the intelligence they needed to fight back effectively. "Can you guide our ships to the enemy positions?" "Yes, but I need to be connected directly to the fleet communication system. I have to be able to talk to the ship commanders in real time." Jake arranged for Lyra to be linked into the Alliance battle network. Her voice became the guiding force for dozens of ship captains who could no longer rely on their own sensors or telepathic coordinators. "Enemy squadron approaching from Sector 7, she would announce. 3 heavy cruisers and 6 fighters. They are planning to target the medical ships." "Confirmed," came the reply from Alliance fighters. Moving to intercept, the battle raged for hours. Lyra sat in the command center with her eyes closed, her consciousness spread across the entire battlefield. She could sense every Vardani ship, every weapon charging, every tactical decision being made by enemy commanders. There. 6 months after the victory over the Vardani Empire, Jake and Lyra traveled throughout Alliance space as newlyweds and ambassadors. Their mission was different from typical diplomatic work. They were teaching Alliance worlds about the value of diversity and the strength that comes from including people with different abilities. Their first stop was the Valorian home world, where physical perfection had been prized for centuries. Jake and Lyra met with the Valorian Council in their crystal palace, surrounded by statues of idealized warriors and athletes. "Princess Lyra," said Council Leader Diana, "your actions during the war have forced us to reconsider our beliefs about perfection and strength. We want to learn from your example." Lyra sat gracefully in the council chamber, her white walking stick resting against her chair. "The first thing you must understand is that I am not perfect. I have limitations just like everyone else. The difference is that I have learned to work with my limitations instead of being ashamed of them." She explained how her blindness had forced her to develop other senses more fully, how the isolation caused by her disability had given her time to strengthen her telepathic abilities, how learning to navigate a world designed for sighted people had made her more adaptable and creative in solving problems. "We have young Valorians who are born with conditions we consider flaws," Diana admitted. "Weak muscles, poor coordination, limited physical strength. We have always hidden them away or tried to fix them with surgery and medicine. What if instead you helped them discover what they could do well?" Jake suggested. "On Earth, some of our greatest scientists and artists are people who might be considered physically imperfect by Valorian standards." The Valorians were skeptical at first, but they agreed to try new approaches. They established schools that focused on developing mental and creative abilities alongside physical training. They created technology that helped people with different physical capabilities participate fully in society. The changes were not immediate, but within months, the Valorians reported surprising discoveries. A young woman with weak muscles became a brilliant engineer who designed more efficient machines. A man with poor coordination became a gifted composer whose music was unlike anything heard before. Children who had been hidden away began contributing ideas that their physically perfect peers had never considered. Jake and Lyra's next visit was to the Nexari Federation, where logic and computational thinking dominated everything. The Nexari had always believed that emotional or intuitive thinking was inferior to pure rational analysis. "Your telepathic abilities appear to be based on emotional and intuitive processing," said Coordinator Mark during their meeting. Our studies suggest this should make you less effective at strategic planning, yet your contributions were crucial to our victory. Lyra smiled. Your studies are based on the assumption that rational thinking is always superior to other forms of processing. But different types of problems require different approaches. Sometimes the fastest path to a solution comes from intuition rather than calculation. She demonstrated by helping the Nexari solve several problems they had been working on for years. Complex social issues that resisted logical analysis became clear when approached through emotional understanding. Technical challenges that seemed impossible were solved by intuitive leaps that skipped over unnecessary computational steps. We have individuals in our society who think differently than our normal patterns, Mark admitted. Those who rely more on instinct and analysis. We have always considered them defective. What if they are not defective, but simply specialized for different kinds of thinking? Jake asked. The human brain has many different processing systems. The most effective. Teams use people with different cognitive strengths. The Nexari began incorporating diverse thinking styles into their research teams. They found that combining logical analysis with intuitive insights produced better results than either approach alone. Projects that had been stalled for years suddenly made breakthrough progress. Their visit to the Chronari worlds was more challenging. The warrior culture valued physical strength and combat ability above everything else. Members who could not fight were considered worthless burdens on society. How can weakness ever be strength? Demanded General Alex during a tense meeting. In battle, the weak die and the strong survive. This is the law of nature. The law of nature also includes cooperation and adaptation, Lyra replied calmly. Your strongest warriors are useless if they cannot communicate, plan, or understand their enemies. Intelligence gathering, strategic thinking, and technological innovation are just as important as physical combat. Jake showed the Chronari historical examples from Earth, how codebreakers who could never lift a sword had won wars by intercepting enemy communications, how engineers with no combat training had designed weapons that made armies invincible, how diplomats prevented conflicts that would have cost thousands of warrior lives. We have craftsmen, engineers, and thinkers among our people, General Alex said reluctantly, but they are not warriors. They do not deserve the same respect. What if your next war is won not by the strongest fighter, but by the person who invents a new weapon or discovers enemy plans? Lyra asked, will you still consider them worthless? The Chronari were slow to change, but gradually they began recognizing non-combat contributions to their society. Engineers who designed better armor and weapons gained status equal to warriors. Intelligence specialists who prevented surprise attacks were honored alongside battle heroes. The rigid hierarchy based solely on fighting ability became more flexible and inclusive. Throughout their travels, Jake and Lyra encountered the same patterns everywhere. Societies that excluded or devalued certain types of people were missing opportunities for innovation and growth. When they started including diverse perspectives and abilities, they discovered solutions to problems they had not even realized they had. But their work was not without opposition. On some worlds, traditional leaders resisted changes that threatened their power. Conservative groups argued that old ways were better and safer. Fear of the unknown made many people reluctant to accept different approaches. Change is always difficult, Lyra told Jake during a quiet moment on their ship between worlds. People fear what they do not understand. It takes time for new ideas to take root. Are you discouraged? Jake asked. No, I can see the progress we are making. Each world we visit plants seeds that will grow over time. The Alliance is becoming more inclusive, more innovative, more adaptable. That makes it stronger. Their travels brought them to worlds they had never imagined. aquatic species who had dismissed land-dwelling members of their society, energy beings who looked down on those who still required physical bodies, silicon-based life forms who considered carbon-based thinking primitive and limited. On each world, they found individuals who had been overlooked or marginalized because they were different. An aquatic engineer who had developed amazing underwater cities, an energy being who could interface directly with computer systems, a silicon-based artist whose crystalline sculptures were more beautiful than anything made by conventional methods. The pattern is always the same, Jake observed. Every society has people with unique abilities, but most societies only value a narrow range of what they consider normal or perfect. That is because it is easier to make everyone the same than to figure out how to use everyone's different strengths, Lyra replied. But the easy way is not always the best way. Their reputation spread throughout the Alliance. Worlds began requesting visits to help them discover and develop the potential in their own overlooked populations. Universities established new programs to study cognitive diversity. Governments created policies to ensure equal participation. For people with different abilities, the changes were not just social. Military effectiveness improved as diverse teams found creative solutions to tactical problems. Scientific research accelerated when different types of thinkers worked together. Economic growth increased as previously excluded populations contributed their skills and ideas. But perhaps the most important change was in how people saw themselves and others. Children grew up learning that being different was not something to hide or fix, but something to develop and celebrate. Adults discovered abilities they never knew they had. Societies became more compassionate and more innovative at the same time. Jake and Lyra returned to Earth for their first wedding anniversary. They stood together in the garden where Jake had proposed, surrounded by friends and family who had supported their journey from the beginning. "Do you ever regret choosing me?" Lyra asked as they watched the sunset. "Never," Jake replied without hesitation. "Choosing you was the smartest decision I ever made. Not just because of what you can do, but because of who you are. Even though I brought you into a war and made your life complicated?" Jake laughed. "Lyra, you did not bring me into anything. You helped me discover what I was meant to do. Before I met you, I was just following orders and doing what others expected. Now I feel like I am making a real difference in the galaxy." As they stood together in the fading light, a message arrived from the Alliance Council. A new crisis had emerged on the Outer Rim worlds. A previously unknown species had made contact, but communication was proving